Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we're looking at an amazing book, Relics of Ancient America, parts 1st and 2nd, compiled by Iner Lamb, A.B. Sawtell Sentinel print. Note: this book was begun in A.D. 1869 from a desire to accumulate facts for comparison and reflection. Some were put down from memory. Some originals are not known to be in print. Tributaries receive their contents from reservoirs. All the outs and half the ins are responsible for the present state of things. Thomas Chatterton. Preface. The author takes no credit to himself, unless it is in the notes. He has given credit to others, and if there is any omission, he apologizes and will make corrections and give satisfaction. Relics of Ancient America, first part. Relics of Ancient America, and a few others, with notes made with a view to arrive at a correct solution of prehistoric times. The following 4 classes were compiled from Egbert Guernsey's History of the United States, with a notice of American Antiquities and Indian Tribes, Philadelphia, 1869. The first class form Welsh and Scandinavian relics, the second Grecian and Roman, the third Egyptian, the fourth Antediluvian, the fifth consists of a miscellaneous collection. Class first. In Onondaga County, New York, is the site of an ancient burying ground in which timber of second growth was growing, judging from the reduced mold of timber lying around. The concentric circular grains of trees of first growth would guarantee a period of 100 years. In one of the graves was found a glass bottle and an iron hatchet edged with steel. The eye or place of the helve was round and projected like the ancient German axe. In the same town were found the remains of a blacksmith's forge and crucibles such as mineralogists use in refining metals. In Scipio, Mr. Halstead has from time to time plowed up on his farm 700 or 800 pounds of brass, which appeared to have been formed into various implements of husbandry and war. On this field forest timber was growing abundantly, which had attained a great age and size. Mr. H. also found sufficient wrought iron to shoe his horses for many years. We cannot resist the conclusion that on this farm was situated a village of Danes or Welsh, who were exterminated by war hundreds of years before Columbus was born. Note: allowing 500 years for the growth of the forest timber, all these settlers of New York State, including those at the mouth of the St. Lawrence, must have been exterminated about the 12th century by the second great invasion of Tartar hordes from the north. On the Black River, New York, a man digging a well found a quantity of china and delftware at the depth of several feet. In Tompkins County, New York, Mr. Lee discovered on his farm the entire works of a wagon reduced to dust. On the flats of the Genesee River, on the land of Mr. Liberty Judd, was found a bit of silver about the length of a man's finger, hammered to a point at one end, while the other was smooth and square, on which was engraved in Arabic figures the words, "In the year of our Lord 600. Note: Dionysius Exiguus fixed the AD in the year 527 AD, hence 600 was within 100 years since the custom of reckoning by AD in Europe began. The Welsh and the Scandinavians settled at the mouth of the St. Lawrence about AD 1000 to 1100. The traces of a Scandinavian, Welsh, and Danish population are clear. They form a class of antiquities entirely distinct from the walled towns and mounds, and must have been subsequent to them. The forts of Danes, Belgi, and Saxon were round. Those of the Romans were square. A tribe of Indians, a great way up the Missouri, speak Welsh and retain some ceremonies of Christian worship, but are like Indians in habits and appearance. Imlay, in his History of America, says this is universally allowed to be a fact. At the headwaters of the Red River is another tribe of Indians calling themselves Maxedas, having Indian manners, customs, and speech, and who resemble the Welsh. Powell, in his History of Wales, speaks of a lost colony in the 12th century, and of the voyage of Madoc, the son of Owen Gwynedd, Prince of Wales, who went west and settled in a new country. A tribe of white Welsh Indians were found in Ohio who had a very old Welsh New Testament written in Greek characters, which they could not read. Note: the above mention of the 12th century affords a clue as to when the extermination of the last settlements of New York State took place, prior to the growth of the forest mentioned above, and to the discovery by Columbus. The Norwegians discovered Greenland AD 964, after which settlements were made at the mouth of the St. Lawrence. Modocs is a name of a tribe of Indians Compare with Madoc. Lord Monboddo says this country, America, was known to the Old World as early as the Siege of Troy, BC 1184. Leif was the first settler in Greenland. Snovo Sturluson speaks of Bjorn of Iceland being driven by a storm and finding America, and that in AD 1121 a bishop Eric went from Greenland to Vineland, Labrador, to convert to Christianity. Bancroft, in Native Races Volume 5, says there are Indian tribes in South America who have had the rites of baptism, circumcision, and the purification of women at childbirth long before the Catholic missionaries went among them. Class 2nd, Grecian and Roman. There are mounds and fortifications along the Mississippi anterior to the above and that belong to the 3rd class. The mound builders, Toltecs, would be still a more distinct class and contemporary with the Druids. The largest mound is near Wheeling, Ohio. It is 90 feet high, 50 rods in circumference, and filled with thousands of human skeletons. Judging from large trees, it has been deserted 1,200 years, i.e. since AD 5 or 600. Note, this date would place the mound subsequent to the times of the Greeks and Romans, who would begin to be driven back by the first invasion of Tartars from the north, and who made warfare the business of their lives, AD 600 to 700. In Dade County, Wisconsin, are mounds of figures, human, with unnatural length of arms. At Marietta are extensive fortifications and a fort containing 50 acres of land, showing the power of the builders and the strength of the enemy, like the Roman forts described by Josephus, see Roman camp. In the same county is a mound like a human figure, 35 feet in width, 6 feet in height, 125 feet in length, and 140 feet from one extremity of the arm to the other. On the bank of the Muskingum River and at Circleville, Ohio, are the ruins of immense walls, forts, mounds, and wells of beautiful hewn stone, and according to the most scientific principles of architecture. At Paint Creek, Ohio, are works of art more wonderful than any yet described, 6 near each other. One enclosure has 3 forts containing 17, 27, and 77 acres each, and 14 gateways from 1 to 6 rods in width. At the outside of each of these gateways is an ancient well from 4 to 6 rods in width at the top. Within the large enclosure is an elliptical elevation 25 feet high, 100 feet in circumference, and filled with human bones. The elevation is perfectly smooth and level at the top, probably where priests sacrificed human beings before the vast throng which congregated around the mound to witness the bloody rites. New discoveries are constantly being made. Note, this seems as if the mound builders had raised a mound inside of an old Roman fort, showing that they came subsequently. The Druids at one time offered human sacrifices. That of virgins and widows was well known in India. There are forts, tumuli, mounds, roads, wells, and walls, enclosing from 1 to 500 acres made of stone and earth, 20 feet in thickness and very high, works requiring too much labor for Indians ever to have performed. The skeletons found in them are not like those of the Red Indians, who are tall and slim, while these are rarely over 5 feet in height. The tallest and shortest of the human races are in Patagonia. The Pueblos, a short race, making more pretensions to civilization than the rest, are found in North and Central America. They could climb and needed protection, and are supposed to be the descendants of the cliff dwellers, but without sufficient reason. Weapons of brass have been found in several parts of America, both in Canada and Florida, and with curiously wrought stones, showing that the country was once well peopled with industrious and civilized nations. Note, may not the mound builders, who were a rather short race but not so much so as the Pueblos, or town Indians, have been driven back by the first invasion of Tartars from the north, probably about 600 BC, and after the barbarians had overrun the Roman Empire, AD 2 or 300, the Danes, Welsh, and Scandinavians, also short men, were driven back or exterminated by a second invasion of Tartars in the 12th century AD. In January 1821, on the banks of the river Desperes, there were found by an Indian a Roman coin, presented to Governor Clark, and a Persian coin near a spring in Ohio, some feet underground. In December 1827, a planter discovered in a field a short distance from Montevideo a sort of tombstone with characters engraved on it. On removing it, he found a small excavation formed of masonry, containing 2 ancient swords, a helmet, a rusty shield, and an earthenware vessel of large capacity, with writing in Greek thus: "During the dominion of Alexander the Great, son of Philip, king of Macedon, in the 63rd Olympiad, Ptolemaeus." The rest was worn out. On the handle of one sword is a portrait of a man supposed to be Alexander the Great. Note: by those foreigners who lived in Palestine, the Olympiads are reckoned from the captivity of the two tribes. On the helmet there is a sculptured work of exquisite skill representing Achilles dragging the corpse of Hector round the walls of Troy, taken from Homer's Iliad. In connection with the above, Eratosthenes, the Greek philosopher, mathematician, and historian, BC 200, mentions Pythias, who lived in the time of Alexander the Great, as being a great philosopher, geographer, and voyager, and that he made several voyages into the Atlantic Ocean. Note: as the first Olympiad began BC 776, and they were held every 4 years, it would be the 110th Olympiad in the time of Alexander the Great, unless they were at first held every 7 years. But it fits to begin it at the captivity of the two tribes, 588 BC. The Greeks may have followed the custom then prevailing at Ptolemy. Class 3rd, Egyptian. Lexington, Kentucky stands nearly over the site of an ancient town of great extent and magnificence, amply evidenced by the wide range of its works covering a great quantity of ground and a catacomb with niches, compartments, and mummies, embalmed, and in as great state of preservation as any that have been dug out of the tombs of Egypt 3,000 years old. The catacomb was 18.5 rods in length, and 6.5 in width, and 7 feet high, and would hold 2,000 subjects. It was found in the bowels of limestone rock 15 feet below the surface. The descent to the cavern was gradual. Note: the Egyptians always excavated their tombs in the earth and along the sides of mountains of rock. The custom is purely Egyptian. That they were a maritime people is shown from the following. In BC 604, they, under King Necho, or Necho, fitted out an expedition for the Phoenicians to sail from the Red Sea around Africa and return by the Mediterranean Sea, a distance of 16,000 miles, which they effected without the compass, for they were better skilled in the knowledge of the heavenly bodies than we are. Class 4th, Antediluvian. The massive pyramidal structures found in Easter Island were doubtless the work of a gigantic race who preceded the Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Chinese, for magnates walked the first. They knew nothing about glass and had the rudest hieroglyphics. They had to contend with inundations, earthquakes, carnivorous beasts, and savage tribes. 2 petrified giants, 7 feet in height, were found in a cavern on Mount Rainier, Washington. They may have been antediluvians on account of being giants. The remains of former dwellings, hearths, fireplaces, and bones of animals in immense quantities have been found along the banks of the Ohio many feet underground, while above them are found the former habitations of men, and over them trees growing as large as any in the surrounding forest. On San Rafael Island, opposite Santa Barbara, high up on the elevated land are found an immense number of bones of whales. The top was level with the sea when the bones of whales were thrown upon it. The piles of shells were since the sea receded. Indians lived on shellfish. Firebrands, split wood, ashes, coal, tools, utensils of various kinds, brass rings, immense vessels of pottery of curious workmanship and remarkable size have been discovered 80 and 90 feet below the surface. On the Susquehanna River, a piece of pottery was found 12 feet in diameter across the top, 36 feet in circumference, and of proportional size and form. Miscellaneous class. In digging a well near Cincinnati, AD 1826, the stump of a tree was found in a sound state 80 feet below the earth. The blows of the axe were still visible, and the remains of the tree were firmly rooted in its original position several feet below the bed of the Ohio. Another stump was discovered near this place, 94 feet below the surface, and on the top it appeared as if some iron tool had been consumed by rust. Note: the sound state and rusted tools point to its being overwhelmed from the west, hence its depth is not at all due to decayed vegetation. We infer that the bed of the river had itself arisen and left the stump below. In the section about Fredonia, on the south side of Lake Erie, utensils of various kinds have been found. Also split wood and ashes from 30 to 50 feet below the surface and much below the bed of Lake Erie, which may have been since raised. Near Williamsburg in Virginia, about 60 miles from the sea, the entire vertebrae of a whale was found and several fragments of the ribs embedded several feet below the surface. It is affirmed by some that the sea encroaches on the land on the western coast and retires on the eastern, but the land also rises on both coasts, from the fact that no mounds are found on the states bordering on the Atlantic and Pacific. If there is no great whirlpool at the South Pole, there is no reason why oceans should subside. Therefore, we infer that the land has risen. But if there is one, the ocean has also sunk. Would not the top of Mount Raphael's land have been more disturbed if the land had risen? In the same region, at depths of from 60 to 90 feet, the teeth of sharks have been discovered. From these and various discoveries from 50 to 100 feet below the surface, we are led to infer also that the original surface of America may not have been much disturbed, but was suddenly overwhelmed from the west. The vast state of loam and clay, gravel and stone, which lie over each other, evince from their unnatural positions that they were thrown furiously by water over the continent from the countries of the west. Note: the sea must have been much higher and rolled its bottom over the east. This violent overturning could be ascribed to the shifting of the poles of the earth. Some suppose that Alpha Draconis was once our polar star, also Alpha Centauri. The former is gathered from the bearings of the Egyptian Sphinx. Relics of the reindeer are also found in the south of France. It can be calculated from the delta that there was no Mississippi River 15,000 years ago. Quills of birds have been found large enough to admit a man's arm into the caliber, and the claws measure 3 feet in length. The footprints of very large birds are found on the rocks of Connecticut. The air must have been very much denser, the winds stronger, and the mountains lower when magnates, such as the dinormus of New Zealand, walked the earth. In systems of ancient maritime deposits, frogs were as large as sheep. The remains of a monster were discovered in Louisiana 17 feet underground, probably on rocky mountain land, whose largest bone weighed 1,200 pounds. It, the bone, was 20 feet long and was either a jaw or shoulder blade. The animal is supposed to have been 125 feet long, probably Behemoth, the chief of the ways of God in creation. The largeness of the creatures would intimate that the earth was much larger, the sea much higher, and that the time in solidifying and assuming a level, notwithstanding its various elevations and depressions, and the increase of soil in the valleys, is slight. Note: vast numbers of human skeletons heaped up with broken tips of arrows in the skulls have been found several feet underground in Louisiana, with plain indications of a seashore beach above them, and from which the sea of the Gulf has receded. The skulls were prognathous and high at the occipital crown. At Lafayette, 12 miles south of Syracuse, Mr. William Newell was digging a well in limestone and found a petrified man near the surface. It was 10 feet 2.5 inches in length. The thigh was 12 inches thick. The body was lying on its right side with one hand at its back, the other in front, and the left leg thrown over its right. Note: from the position of the limbs, the action of water is suspected. He may have been drowned in Lake Ontario on a bed of limestone when it was much larger, or from the deluge when violence filled the earth. In 1816 to 1823 AD, a hill was cut through to form a canal near Mostich in the suburbs of Liege. In excavating, there were found an extraordinary number of bones, tusks, and molar teeth of elephants, horns of deer, bones of a species of ox, mastodon, and other mammalia, together with a human lower jaw and teeth preserved at Lebden, and at a depth of 19 feet below the surface, where the loess joins the underlying gravel in a stratum of sandy loam. The stratum was intact and undisturbed, but the human jaw was isolated, the nearest tusk of an elephant being 6 yards removed from it in a horizontal direction. Most of the other mammalian bones were found in or near the gravel, but some of the tusks and teeth of the elephants were met with much nearer the surface. Note: the above would suggest the bed of an ancient river, the sandy loam implying a time when the water was shallow and vegetation grew on it. When the river was swollen, the bones would be found higher up on the banks. Rivers passing along limestone would excavate and fill in with bones that were stranded on the shallows. A human skull has been found in a bone cave, the Neanderthal in the Netherlands, and one in the Engis cave at Lake Zurich. These are said to be more ancient than any yet found, and according to Professor Huxley, approach the European type. A skeleton found in the island of Guadeloupe, now in the British Museum, is found to belong to some of the Caribs who were killed in battle 200 years ago, although petrified in limestone. The following affords a clue as to the time compared with depth and with the nature of the ground. The foundation of Solomon's temple has lately been dug up at a depth of 90 feet below the surface. The layers of stone were 125 feet in length. The areas of the succeeding temples over it were much greater. This would give 2,900 years for 90 feet of depth on a mountain being 1 foot in 413 years, allowing 20 feet for the original foundation. The head of the original brook Kedron, known at the time of Christ, has been found 60 feet below the surface. A depth of 4 feet will account for a generation of forest trees. Human graves were found 60 feet in depth in Louisiana, and several feet over them oyster shells were scattered as if thrown up by a sea on a beach. On the banks of the Arkansas River, 75,000 human skulls were found, with metallic tips of arrows in them, of 2 races of men evidently slain in battle, in sand and covered over with several feet of sand, and over it again several feet of clay, and over it again several feet of alluvium containing large forest trees. The skulls were narrow, elongated back, and prognathous. In some parts of Nicaragua, beads of lava, basalt, and chalcedony are numerous. Monstrous forms and shapes, such as a coiled plumed serpent, are found painted 40 feet up the perpendicular side of a precipice. They understood the making of pigments of clay and stone utensils and obsidian arrow tips. Their achievements in sculpture made them seek uses for them, hence their reverence for feats of sculpture amounting to worship. In skill and taste, some ancient pottery is superior to modern. They found it abundant in lake islands, i.e. crater lakes. The pottery was evidently made when lava was abundant, for they could have dug deep into the ground without the use of metallic tools, hence the uses of funeral vases and tripods. Stags and alligators often form the ornamentation of their pottery. They are found in Central America. One ancient copper mask was found in Nicaragua, supposed to be at least 3,000 years old, very elaborately ornamented, a la mosaic, at Uxmal, British Encyclopedia, Volume 4, page 324. The device of a beast springing on the back of a human form and idols also occur in terracotta. The figures are studiously grotesque and monstrous, indicating a delight for the ludicrous or for a desire to banish constant fears. Bancroft refers the relics of Nicaragua to the 16th century BC. Cremation indicates a very numerous Aboriginal people, also their highly finished taste for ornamental vases. Calaveras County has also yielded many interesting relics of a past age, of the same nature as those described in Tuolumne County. The famous Calaveras skull was taken from a mining shaft at Altaville at a depth of 130 feet beneath several strata of lava and gravel. Many stone mortars and mastodons' bones have been found about Altaville, but not under lava. The skull was of Pliocene period, found as follows: black lava 4 feet, gravel 3 feet, light lava 30 feet, gravel 5 feet, then red lava 4 feet, then red gravel 17 feet, light lava 15 feet, gravel 25 feet, brown lava 9 feet, gravel 5 feet, in which the skull was found. Gravel implies rivers from melted snow. An Indian arrowhead made of stone, as in our time, was lately picked up from the solid cement at Buckeye Hill at a depth of 80 feet from the ground and about 1 foot from the bedrock. Note, the Calaveras skull was found 40 feet deeper than the foundation of Solomon's temple and should not require 5,000 years. A volcanic age could succeed and subside between it and the stone mortar age. 1 foot from the bedrock would imply, at Buckeye Hill, a sea coast line not far off. Lava could be thrown 150 miles. A well-executed representation of a deer's foot, cut out of slate, in a tube 5 inches long and 1 foot in diameter, were found 30 feet below the surface, over which grew a huge pine tree, the growth of centuries, at Don Pedro's Bar, in AD 1861 in California. A petrified mammoth bone was found weighing 54 pounds, 35 feet in depth in gravel, also human skulls in post-diluvian strata over 50 feet in depth, river bottom. Mammoth bones at Diamond Spring, 40 feet in depth. Mortars were found at 100 feet in depth, also fossil bones and stone relics in the mines about Placerville. In Nevada County, at Grass Valley, stone implements have been found at different dates from 10 to 80 feet below the surface. A skillet or saucepan, made of lava, hard as iron, was found at Colima in 1851 AD, 15 feet below the surface under an oak tree, which tree was not less than 1,000 years old. A human forearm bone with crystallized marrow embedded was found in a petrified cedar 63 feet below the surface. A collarbone was found in the gravel of the Great Blue Lead in 1857 AD, not less than 1,000 feet below the forest-covered surface. Mammoth bones at Columbia and Stanislaus County were found 35 feet in depth. A hyena's tooth at 60 feet in depth in Amador County. 2 mortars from the bank of Yuba River 16 feet in depth. A pestle and mortar at 16 feet in depth in auriferous gravel, weighing 30 pounds and holding 2 quarts. An oval granite dish with the usual bones, under from 20 to 30 feet of calcareous tuft, 18.5 feet in diameter and 2.5 inches in thickness. A stone bead of calspar was found with the bones of the mastodon under a strata of lava 300 feet from the mouth of a tunnel. In 1858 AD, there was found in tunneling a stone mortar at a depth of 350 feet from the surface of the earth, lying in auriferous gravel under a thick strata of lava. In 1862, another mortar was found at the depth of 340 feet and 1,800 feet from the mouth of the tunnel. At the same level, spearheads from 6 to 8 inches in length and broken off where attached to the shaft were found. The work of human hands is shown to have been discovered in connection with the bones of the mastodon, elephants, horses, camels, and other animals long since extinct. In the carving of pipes by the mound builders, the representation of natural objects is much more accurate than of the cliff dwellers, who must therefore have preceded them. Indigenous animals are truthfully represented, also lamantine and toucan. It is hard to think how the mound builders could cut down forests, dig up earth, with only soft copper quartz, galena, or obsidian tools. The bones of fowls and shells are found in caves along the coasts. Lance heads broken by fire are taken from altar mounds. Elaborately worked vases are found. Their altars and religious mounds are made with great care and exactness. Several bushels of lance heads of milky quartz were found in one mine. Pipes are cut from a single piece of porphyry or red pipestone. Bones of animals are found worked into daggers, awls, beads, and implements. Their knives were of obsidian. They may have had bone shovels and scoops. A piece of copper weighing 5 tons was found 15 feet below the surface, under trees that were at least 400 years old. That lump of copper had been raised on skids and bore marks of fire. Some stone implements were scattered about, also hammers for making copper wedges. Some stone hammers weighed 40 pounds. Much worn wooden shovels are often found. They could not have worked the mines in winter with their methods. The mound builders, the Toltecs, were numerous, united, and agricultural. The modern Indians know nothing about those mines of copper. Hunters never build extensive public works. The earth had been well cleared of wild beasts. The animal carvers of the lamantine, elk, and toucan preceded them as a race, probably before the deluge. All traces of architecture have disappeared, except in South and Central America. Their earthworks show more perseverance than skill. Wooden buildings made by stone and copper tools seem impossible. Their monuments imply a widespread religious system under a powerful priesthood. Their altar mounds suggest sacrifices and human bones cremated to put in vases. Resemble the uses of the southern pyramids with reference to the pole star. Bancroft thinks the mound builders came from Nahua. Their works were not built by a migrating people, but by one that had dwelt long in the land. Notes: the Pueblos were not migrating. The results attained require from 4 to 5 centuries. If the civilization was indigenous and not imported, a longer time would be necessary. A northern origin would imply a longer duration of time than a southern. None of their works, mounds, stand on the last formed terraces of rivers. Those on the second bear traces of having been invaded by water. The last terrace required a longer time for formation on account of the gradual longitudinal leveling of the riverbeds. There has been a complete disappearance of their wooden structures. Length of time is suggested by the decomposition of human bones well calculated for preservation. Skeletons are found in Europe, well preserved for 1,800 years. Historic tradition would have been preserved had there been contact with a superior immigrant race. The fact that the monuments were covered in the 17th century with primitive forests, uniform with those that covered the other parts of the country, that trees 400 years old exist over the monuments, and that equally large ones were found at their feet, on and under the ground in all stages of decomposition, shows that the abandonment of the works must be dated back at least twice the age of the trees. The first growth on the abandonment of cultivated land is very unlike the original forest, both in species and size, and several generations would be required to restore the primeval forest. General notes. This article ought, perhaps, to have been put further on in the discussion of general causes. Dr. Wilson has shown that the mound builders of Ohio were not Red Indians. Dr. Aitken Meigs of Philadelphia has come to the conclusion, from the examination of 1,125 skulls, that no skulls can be said to belong exclusively to any race or tribe, that none of them can be regarded as strictly typical, and that there is a marked tendency in them to graduate into each other more or less sensibly. Dr. Cummings of London says in his book entitled Moses Right and Colenso Wrong, no traces of man have been found in the drift which is next below alluvium. Drift has been caused by water and ice and is therefore older than the deluge, which came from north to south and brought icebergs with it. Sir Charles Lyell says there existed on the earth some 40 or 50,000 years ago a race of animals in the shape of man, who were able to make arrowheads and other rude implements of flint. The arrowheads of the drift period are older than 6,000 years. The ages of stone, bronze, and iron implements are contemporary with firs, oaks, and beech trees. In digging a tunnel recently in Tuolumne County, a pestle and mortar were found in gold-bearing gravel many feet underground. Those exhibited in the Los Angeles Museum show exquisite skill in their manufacture. They were evidently heirlooms and used for pounding either cereals or ore. There has been recently found in Arizona, 12 miles from Espanola, a large subterranean cave, having a watchtower above, with 1,700 compartments, and similar to the Great Cave of Kentucky. One cliff cave in Arizona has the imprint on the wall of a baby's chubby hand done when the plastering was first put on. Some of these cliff caves are now found with extremely difficult access, high above streams. Close to the cave near Espanola, 2 skeletons were found, a male and a female, 7 feet in length. The femur of the female measured 19 inches. The skeleton of a man resembling a red Indian was found 16 feet below the surface and below 4 successive layers of buried trees while excavating for gasworks at New Orleans. Note: 4 feet of depth accounts for a generation of forest trees. A human skeleton has been found in a quarry in North America in limestone and petrified, 15 feet below the surface and lower than the relics of the rhinoceros. Query: when did the sandstone become hard and how? And where are the animals that made the imprints in the tracks of 40 species of bipeds and quadrupeds found in sandstone along the Connecticut River? On the small island of Easter in the Pacific Ocean, which contains about 2,000 savages who speak the language of Tahiti, colossal stone statues are found on platforms of Herculean masonry, made with great skill and tact. The flesh of the mammoth found preserved in the Arctic regions has been eaten by dogs in the last century. Semi-tropical animals have disappeared in the north. Prehistoric relics, antediluvian. Creston, January 24th, AD 1891. Workmen excavating a cellar in Adams County, Iowa, a few days ago came upon the memento of a long-forgotten race. They struck what at first appeared to be a solid ledge of rock or coal, and sitting down to rest, one of them began to pick at an apparent fissure, when a solid rock nearly 2 feet square disappeared with a dull thump. The men set eagerly to work, and removing the bottom of the pit, discovered a chamber with a 15-foot ceiling on walls 20 by 20 feet in extent, which were of neatly seamed stonework. Ranged in rows on rudely constructed platforms were skeletons, each with an arrow and tomahawk by its side, also earrings and bracelets of lead lying where they were dropped, by women, and piles of what appeared to have been fur on the center of the platform. Each pile crumbled to dust as soon as exposed to the light. A number of tools made of copper were also found. Note: this may have been a tomb. Tomahawks and scalping knives were used for making utensils out of skulls. The following is taken from The Return, Davis City, Iowa, for December 1890. An interesting find near Mendon, Illinois, that puzzles the antiquarians consists of fragments of a musical instrument made of copper. The characters on the sounding board are unlike those of other alphabets, Hittite, Aztec, or Mormon. Some few years ago, 2 inscribed tablets were found near Davenport, Iowa, covered with peculiar figures, and among them strange hieroglyphic letters. The members of the Davenport Academy did not undertake to decide what alphabet it was, but the secretary and other members maintained that it was one with which the mound builders were acquainted, that they were an ancient people and civilized enough to have an alphabet. By a strange fatuity, the editor of the American Antiquarian has come upon a find which is as puzzling as the Davenport tablets. It is in the shape of a musical instrument, or rather the fragments of one. The wood of it had decayed, but the copper which seems to have constituted the sounding board and keys still remained in good condition. One of the strange features of the instrument is there is not a particle of iron about it. It seemed to have been a combination of a harp and violin. The shape is 3-cornered like a harp, but the strings are stretched across a bridge, and fastened to the keyboard at the end as on a violin, making a very unusual combination. There is no instrument like it in modern use, and nothing among the ancients that at all resembles it. The mysterious part of the whole relic is that there are 10 hieroglyphic characters cut into the copper sounding board close by the keys. These hieroglyphics are unlike any musical signs known in modern times. They are unlike any known alphabet. They resemble the hieroglyphics found in the Davenport tablets, over which the savants have puzzled themselves so thoroughly. They are also like those in the Greek grave tablet, time of Alexander the Great. They are not exactly counterparts, but resemble them. The letters on the Davenport tablets have been compared to Hittite, Phoenician, Samaritan,